I bought that Mustang with 30 years of patience, and a father who never once told me he was proud of me. My daughter drove it like it was already hers before she ever asked whose name was on the insurance card. That's the part she forgot on Thanksgiving. That's the part I never will. Welcome back, fathers and mothers. If you're joining me for the first time, hit subscribe and stay with me tonight. This one runs long because it has to. Some stories don't make sense unless you hear the whole thing. And if you've ever looked at someone you raised and felt like a stranger standing in your own kitchen, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. Before I get to my daughter, I need to tell you about a woman named Beverly Oakes. Beverly came to work at my hardware store on Millbrook Road, outside of Knoxville, in the spring of 2009. She'd just come out of a rough divorce, 2 kids in elementary school, and she needed steady hours more than she needed much else. I hired her because she knew the difference between a lag bolt and a carriage bolt before I even finished the interview. Most people I'd talked to that week could not have told you which end of a drill bit goes into the chuck. She started as a floor associate. Within 8 months, she was running the register training. Within 2 years, she was managing the Tuesday through Saturday shift without me asking her to take it on. She just saw what needed doing and did it. When my wife Carol got her diagnosis in 2019, Beverly was the one who quietly rearranged her own schedule so I could take Carol to her Monday appointments without worrying about who was opening the store. She never put it in writing. She never asked for extra pay. She just moved her days around and left a casserole dish on my back step twice a month for the better part of a year. I found out it was her because she left it in one of her own containers and forgot to take it back. When I tried to return it, she waved me off and said she had plenty. That's who Beverly Oakes is. My name is Gerald Patton. I'm 64 years old. I built Patton's True Value on Millbrook from a 1,800 square foot storefront. My father left me into a full supply house with 3 full-time employees and a loyal customer base that's kept the lights on through 2 recessions and a pandemic. And until about 14 months ago, I would have told you that my greatest failure as a father was working too many Saturdays when my daughter was young. I've since revised that opinion. My daughter's name is Cassandra. Cassie. She's 31 years old, sharp as a finishing nail, prettier than she ever gave herself credit for, and blessed with a confidence in her own reasoning that I spent years calling self-assurance before I was honest enough to call it what it actually was. After Carol passed in the fall of 2021, I gave Cassandra a spare key to the Mustang. It's a 1969 Fastback, Gulf Blue, that my father restored in his garage over 4 years and left to me when he died. I'd finished the interior myself in 2003. It is the single most valuable thing I own that has nothing to do with the store, and I loaned her the key that November because she'd mentioned needing something that felt solid during her grief. Carol was her mother. I understood wanting something that felt like holding on. What I didn't anticipate was that the key would become a permanent arrangement nobody discussed out loud. Now I need to tell you about a young man named Deshaun. Deshaun Price was 19 when he walked into the store and asked if I had any part-time openings. He'd been referred by a workforce re-entry program. The county ran out of the community college, the kind of program that gets underfunded every election cycle and keeps changing its name, but manages to do good work anyway. He'd spent 2 years in juvenile detention for something he'd done at 17 that I'm not going to characterize for you, because it's not my story to tell, and because what I watched him become in my store is the only version of him that matters to me now. He started sweeping, stalking, hauling mulch bags to cars in the parking lot in the July heat without being asked twice. He asked questions about inventory management and electrical supplies with the kind of focused attention that made me feel like I was the interesting one in the room, which, if you've ever met a 64-year-old hardware man, you know is not the default assumption. Deshaun is 23 now. He holds the store keys. He opens 3 mornings a week, and on the mornings he opens, he has the coffee going before Beverly arrives. Not because she asked him to. Because Loretta taught him I'm sorry, because Beverly modeled it, and he absorbed it the way young people absorb things when they're finally in an environment that treats them like they're capable of learning. He doesn't have family close by. A grandmother in Memphis, he calls on Sundays. His mother is not in the picture in any reliable sense. What he has is the store, Beverly, and the confidence that comes from knowing how to do a thing well. I've watched him explain deck screw specifications to a contractor twice his age with an even-handedness that made the contractor thank him afterward. He's going to be fine regardless of what happens to me. But that's getting ahead of the story. The call came on a Tuesday in early October, 2 days before Thanksgiving weekend started in earnest, and foot traffic at the store always picks up because people realize they need something for the shed or the garage door before the family arrives. I was checking in a pallet delivery when my phone rang, and it was Cassandra, which wasn't unusual, but the tone was, right from the word hello. Dad, I need to talk to you about something, and I need you to actually listen without turning it into a negotiation. I set down my clipboard and told her I was listening. She wanted $17,000. She had a friend, a college acquaintance. Really, someone I'd heard mentioned twice in 5 years who was launching a boutique wellness studio in Asheville and needed a final investor to close the funding round. The opportunity was closing by the end of the month. It was the kind of thing that didn't come around twice, she said. I asked her some questions. What was the business model? Had she seen the financials? What was the friend's background in running a business? Reasonable questions, I thought. The kind a person asks before wiring $17,000 to a wellness studio in Asheville they'd never heard of. Cassandra's patience ran out around question 3. I swear, every single time I bring something to you, it becomes a cross-examination. Carol's parents gave me money when I needed it without interrogating me. You treat me like I'm asking you to fund a crime. Carol's parents. My late wife's parents, who, God rest them both, had expressed love through a checkbook for as long as I'd known them, and had never once made either of us account for what we did with any of it. I understood that. It was their way of showing up. But it had also produced a person who heard a reasonable question and felt it as an accusation. I told her I loved her and that I would think about it. She told me not to bother if I was just going to find reasons to say no. She hung up. I stood in the back of the store next to the pallet of half-inch EMT conduit for longer than the job required, just breathing, the way you do when something small has cracked open, something larger, that you weren't quite ready to look at yet. I called Beverly in from the floor and asked her to cover the delivery check-in. She took the clipboard without asking why. She never asks why. Thanksgiving was the coming Thursday. Cassandra was driving up from her apartment in Chattanooga, 2 hours south, and we'd had a standing arrangement for 3 years that she'd come to the house. I'd make Carol's green bean casserole and a turkey breast because it was just the two of us and a whole bird made no sense. And we'd watch whatever football game was on and not talk about anything that required effort. It was the version of the holiday I had come to count on. She arrived at noon, which was on time, which I remember because it surprised me. She'd driven up in the Mustang, which also registered somewhere in the back of my mind, but I let it go. We were fine through the cooking, fine through the first half of the game. It was somewhere in the early afternoon, plates still on the table, that she brought it back up. Did you make a decision? I had. I'd spent 3 days thinking about it carefully and honestly, and I'd decided I was not going to send the money. Not because I couldn't afford it, but because I didn't believe the investment was sound and I did not want to watch her lose it. I told her that. I tried to say it the way I'd rehearsed it in the truck on the way home from the store, which was gently and with specifics. What came back was not gentleness. She told me I had never supported her, that I was so cautious and so small in my thinking that I had built a hardware store in the same city I was born in and called that an achievement while she was trying to do something real with her life. She told me I had spent her whole childhood choosing the store over her, and that she had grown up knowing she was second place to inventory cycles. And she was tired, her word, tired, of watching me act like the money I had was some kind of moral virtue instead of just luck and stubbornness. I sat at my own dining room table under the light Carol had picked out at a salvage market in 2014, the one with the hammered bronze shade she'd been so pleased about, and I listened to my daughter tell me that the best thing I had ever done as a father was probably marry her mother. I let her finish, and then I said, very quietly, the only thing that felt true. Then it sounds like what I build here doesn't belong to you anyway. I pushed back from the table and I picked up my coat off the hook by the door, and I took the Mustang key off the ring, the spare I'd given her in November 2 years earlier, and I set it on the counter. "That's mine," I said. "It's always been mine." And I drove away in my own car. I was on Route 11 heading toward the store, because that's the only place I've ever gone when I don't know where else to go. When my phone started vibrating on the passenger seat, I glanced down at a red light. "Cassandra." I let it ring. It rang again. And then, 30 seconds after the second call, a text came through that I read when I pulled into the Patton's parking lot and sat in the dark. "You took the car while I was still in the house. I'm calling the police and reporting it stolen." I read that message in the front seat of a 1969 Ford Mustang Fastback that had my father's name on the original title transfer and my name on every document since. I read it twice because the first time I thought I'd misread it. Then I called my attorney, a man named Philip Carey who handled Carol's estate and who picks up his phone the way decent people do, which is to say, most of the time, even on holidays. "Philip," she called the cops. I said, "On me, for driving my own car." He was quiet for a moment, and I could hear the particular silence of a lawyer who is not surprised. He asked me a few questions. Did I have the title? Was the registration current? Was my name the only name on the insurance? Yes, and yes. He told me to drive to the store and wait, and that he would call ahead to the Millbrook precinct to make sure any responding officer had accurate context before they showed up. I asked if he thought they would actually show up. He said when someone reports a stolen vehicle, the system tends to respond. The facts tend to sort themselves out quickly. But let's not take chances. He was right on both counts. 2 officers arrived at the store parking lot about 40 minutes later. I had the title, the insurance card, and the registration sitting on the hood of the Mustang when they pulled in. The older officer, a sergeant named Braddock, looked at the paperwork, looked at the car, and looked at me with the kind of tired patience that comes from spending a career mediating exactly this kind of situation. "Mr. Patton," he said, "this vehicle belongs to you." "It does," I said. He told me there was nothing to pursue and that he was sorry for the inconvenience and that I might want to consider whether a spare key was a good idea going forward. I thanked him and I sat in the Mustang for a long time after their lights had cleared the lot. The store was dark. The street was quiet. It was Thanksgiving night and I was sitting in my father's car in my own parking lot, and something in me had gone very still. Not angry. Not sad in the weeping sense. Still. The way a room goes quiet when you finally turn off a machine that's been running so long you'd stopped hearing the noise it made. I thought about Carol. I thought about what she would say. And the honest answer is, I don't know. Because Carol loved Cassandra with a completeness that sometimes made it hard for her to see her clearly, the same way I had trouble seeing the store clearly when I was too close to a problem. But I think Carol also understood, at the end, that love is not the same as unlimited credit. She'd said something like that once about her own parents, in a different context, and I'd stored it away the way you store things you're not ready to use yet. I called Philip back. I told him I wanted to revise the estate documents. He asked when. I said as soon as his office opened Friday. Here's what most people in Cassandra's life do not know, because I am a private man and I have never discussed it with her directly. The store, the house, the Mustang, the full contents of what Carol and I spent 40 years building together. It had been set up to pass to Cassandra, with a portion going to a college access fund we'd seeded for kids coming out of the county's workforce program, the same program that sent me to Sean. I'd never told Cassandra the specifics. I'd told her the general shape of it the way parents do, because you want your kids to feel secure, not because you want them to feel entitled. And I had not yet understood that those two things, in some people, are the same. Philip drew up new documents over the 2 weeks following Thanksgiving. The store, Patton's true value, the building, the lot, the accounts, the supplier relationships I've spent 30 years building went to Beverly Oaks and Deshawn Price as equal partners, structured so that Beverly would hold managing authority until she chose to retire, at which point Deshawn would assume full ownership. The college access fund tripled. The Mustang stays with me until I die, at which point it goes to the Knoxville Automotive Heritage Museum, because that felt like what my father would have wanted, and because no one who called it stolen deserves to inherit it. Cassandra would receive a cash inheritance representing Carol's portion of our shared savings, a genuinely meaningful sum, more than most people her age will ever see at once, and the contents of the house. No store, no land, no business. Philip asked me twice if I was sure. Both times I told him the same thing. I told him I had never been more clear about anything since the morning I decided to sink everything into that first storefront on Millbrook Road, and my father told me I was making a mistake, and I did it anyway, and he turned out to be wrong. I called Cassandra on a Tuesday evening in late November. I asked her to meet me at the store, after close. Not the house, the store. I wanted her to stand on the floor I had built, with hands that were older than she was before she drew her first breath. She arrived at 7. She came in through the side entrance because she still had a key to that door. She was dressed for an office, which she is not currently employed at, and she looked at me with an expression that was trying to be neutral and not quite getting there. Deshawn was in the back, doing a closing inventory count that he does on Tuesdays, even when I don't ask. I hadn't told him Cassandra was coming. He'd met her before, briefly, at a store anniversary event 3 years back. She'd nodded at him from across the room and gone back to her phone. "You could have just said yes," Cassandra said. No greeting, same as the phone call. "You could have just told the truth," I said. Same as I'd been saying her whole life, and apparently not loudly enough. I told her the truth first, that I had made some calls after Thanksgiving, that the wellness studio in Asheville had no registered business entity in Buncombe County, that the friend she'd mentioned had 2 failed LLCs in the last 4 years and an active civil judgment, that the $17,000 was not going to an investment, that I did not know exactly what it was going to, and maybe she didn't fully either, but I knew it was not what she'd told me. She started to say something and I held up my hand, not roughly, just to finish. I told her about the will, all of it, the store to Beverly and Deshawn, the tripled fund, her inheritance, what it was and what it wasn't. The room shifted. I've seen this particular shift before, in customers who've been quoted a repair cost they didn't expect, in employees I've had to let go, and in my daughter, twice in her life before this night. It starts in the eyes and moves to the jaw and then to the hands. "You're giving my store to a stock boy," she said. And I heard Deshawn stop moving in the back. That precise stillness of someone who has spent a lifetime learning to absorb what other people say about them in rooms where they are visible but not considered present. I had seen him practice that stillness before, and every time I saw it, it cost me something. "He runs this store," I said. My voice did not rise. There was nothing to prove. "He's held the keys for 2 years. He opens 3 mornings a week. He knows every supplier line by heart, and he's never once reported a piece of my property stolen to make a point." Something crossed Cassandra's face that I had been waiting years to see and did not feel triumphant about. It was not anger, which I am used to from her. It was not calculation, which I am also used to. It was something smaller and more accurate. A recognition that she had overestimated her position, and the person who had let her overestimate it for too long was no longer going to do that. She left without saying goodbye. I sat down on the stool behind the register. The same stool, Loretta, I'm sorry, Beverly has sat on for 15 years. And I looked at the store the way you look at something you've almost lost, and didn't. Deshawn came out from the back with his clipboard still in his hand. He didn't say anything for a moment. He looked at the door Cassandra had gone through, and then he looked at me. "Mr. Patton," he said, "you want me to finish the count, or should I come back tomorrow?" I told him to finish the count. He nodded and went back to work. That was enough. It has been 7 months. Cassandra has called 14 times. She has sent 11 texts of varying lengths and temperatures, ranging from, "We need to talk through, are you actually serious about this?" through a long message that arrived on a Sunday night that used the word unfair 11 times by my count. I did not count it to be cruel. I counted it because I needed to know if there was one moment in it where she asked how I was. There wasn't. I finally called her back on a Thursday in April. I told her I was not reversing the estate documents. I told her I was not angry with her. I told her that her inheritance was intact and meaningful, and that I hoped she would build something good with it. I told her that the door of the store was open to her, the same as it was to anyone, as a customer. I told her that when she was ready to apologize, not to explain, not to contextualize, but to actually apologize, I would be here. She hung up. I don't know what happens next. I want to tell you that I'm at peace, fathers and mothers, but that's not exactly the word. Peace implies resolution, and this hasn't resolved. What I have instead is a kind of clarity that arrived the way cold mornings arrive in Tennessee, not all at once, and not gently, but cleanly, in a way that makes the edges of things sharp. Beverly knows, I told her the week after Philip finished the paperwork. She sat across from me in the break room with her coffee, and she listened to the whole thing. And then she said, Gerald, are you sure? And I told her I was, and she nodded, and she said, then I'll do right by it. That was all. She went back to the floor. She's been there every morning since at 7:40, 10 minutes before open. Deshaun doesn't know the full scope yet. I'll tell him when it's time. I've been watching him long enough to know he won't know what to do with it at first. He'll go quiet, and then he'll go back to work, because that's what he does when something is too large to hold in the moment. He'll set it down and pick it back up when he's ready. I know this because I have watched him handle every difficult thing that way, and he has never once set something down and walked away from it. The Mustang is in my garage. I drive it on Sunday afternoons now, windows down when the weather allows, out Millbrook Road past the store, and then up into the hills where the trees have been there longer than anyone alive has been keeping track. I don't need to prove anything from behind that wheel. I don't need a destination. I just need to be in my father's car, on a road I know by heart, which, it turns out, is sufficient. If this story found something in you tonight, if you've ever given someone a key and watched them treat it like a deed, hit like and subscribe for the next one. And leave me a comment. I read all of them. Tell me where you're watching from. And tell me this. If you were sitting in that parking lot on Thanksgiving night with that text on your phone, would you have driven back?